Hey, welcome to Agnes Thompson's channel. My name's Catherine, and I'm going to share my story with you.
The sun in Scottsdale, Arizona, isn't just light. It's a physical presence, an almost tangible substance that dictates the rhythm of life. At 68, I'd learned to distinguish its moods, like those of a fickle old friend. There was the gentle, morning softness that filtered into our house, which Richard and I had designed specifically to catch those first, delicate rays. And then there was the merciless afternoon fury that melted the asphalt and sent even the lizards scrambling for shade. Our life in retirement had become as predictable as the sun's transit. Every morning, as the coffee maker quietly gurgled, I'd arrange our pills on two small porcelain saucers. His orange one, shaped like a football, for his blood pressure. My tiny white one, easy to lose, for my thyroid. His blue one, smooth as a river stone, for his cholesterol. This ritual, like a jeweler sorting gems, was the anchor of my day, the starting point in the calm, quiet ocean of retired life. In 2025, managing your health in your golden years had become a full-blown, unpaid job requiring the precision of a Swiss watchmaker and the patience of a Buddhist monk. Richard, my husband of 45 years, sat at the light oak kitchen table, staring into his tablet with a degree of absorption he once reserved for the blueprints of suspension bridges. He was an engineer, a man of logic, steel, and concrete, a man who believed that any problem could be solved with calculations and the right formulas. Now his entire vast, structured world seemed to have shrunk to the dimensions of that glowing rectangle. He communicated there with people whose faces he'd never seen, whose voices existed only as emotionless text on a screen. I placed a mug of his favorite chamomile tea, its faint apple scent rising in the air, in front of him. He nodded absently, his eyes never leaving the screen, darting quickly across the lines of text. I noticed how his fingers, which once held a slide rule with unshakable confidence and could draw a perfectly straight line, now trembled almost imperceptibly as they slid across the smooth, cold glass. It was one of those small, nearly invisible changes that, day by day, accumulate to foreshadow an avalanche. My passion and my former profession was social psychology. For decades, I had stood at a lectern, explaining to hundreds of young, trusting minds how pliable and vulnerable the human mind is. I taught them about cognitive biases, those built-in bugs in our mental software. About confirmation bias, which makes us hunt like a bloodhound for information that supports our beliefs, while turning away disdainfully from anything that contradicts them. About the availability heuristic, which causes us to overestimate the importance of vivid, emotionally charged, and recent events, forgetting the dry statistics. I taught them to see the invisible strings pulled by marketers, politicians, and, of course, scammers of all stripes. The irony, bitter and pervasive, was that in my own family, my knowledge was treated as a harmless eccentricity, something akin to cross-stitching or cultivating rare roses. "Mom, don't start with your psychology again," our daughter, Jessica, would say with a faint but palpable irritation when I tried to explain the behavioral mechanisms behind our 3-year-old grandson's tantrum in the toy store. To them, my lectures on framing and the anchoring effect were just Mom's boring theories. I remember once trying to talk her husband, Tom, out of investing in a revolutionary startup that promised to clean the ocean with nanobots. I pointed out all the red flags, the overly emotional pitch, the lack of technical details, the pressure to act urgently. He just laughed and invested $5,000, which, of course, vanished along with the startup's website 2 months later. They didn't even remember my warning. I watched Richard sink deeper and deeper into his digital world, and my professional instincts were screaming. He, an engineer to the bone, a man of facts and figures, was the perfect target. His faith in logic made him blind to emotional manipulation. He was certain he couldn't be fooled, and that was the most dangerous cognitive bias of all, the illusion of invulnerability. I tried to start a conversation, to approach the topic from a distance, but I was met with a wall of polite, impenetrable indifference. The tension built gradually, like the pressure before a desert thunderstorm. The air becomes still, heavy, and the silence rings in your ears. At first, it was the little things, almost unnoticeable changes in our domestic landscape. Richard started taking his tablet into his office whenever I entered the living room. If I caught him in the middle of a chat, he would hastily minimize the window, asking with an exaggerated, unnatural cheerfulness how my roses were doing. Then came the phone calls. He would walk out to the backyard, pacing alongside the turquoise surface of the pool, speaking in a low, muffled voice. I didn't eavesdrop, but the snippets of phrases that drifted through the glass were strange, like words from another language. Confidentiality, initial phase, discretionary management, offshore structure. One evening, while we were watching an old Humphrey Bogart movie, his phone vibrated on the end table. He glanced at the screen, and his face, usually serious and focused, lit up with a wide, almost boyish grin, so open and vulnerable it made my heart ache for a moment. "It's Aurora," he said, getting up. Just a name, tossed out casually, but his voice held an inflection I hadn't heard in years. He stepped out onto the patio, closing the glass door firmly behind him. I sat staring at the screen, where the black and white shadows played out their drama, but all my attention was out there, beyond the glass. Aurora. The name sounded theatrical, ornate, like a character from a soap opera. Goddess of the dawn. Who is she? A business partner? A consultant? I asked him about it later when he came back, trying to keep my voice as casual as possible. He waved it off, pouring himself a glass of water. "Oh, she's just an expert in international investments. A very, very smart woman. From Geneva. Helping me get a handle on some of the new trends." His explanation was too vague, too smooth. He avoided my eyes, focusing on the glass in his hands. That night, the first real shadow, cold and dark, fell between us. Our conversations started to feel like navigating a minefield. Any attempt on my part to learn more about his new hobby was met with a wall of impenetrable irritation. "Kathy, you don't understand. This is complex stuff," he'd say condescendingly, in the same tone he once used to explain the principles of structural engineering to me. "This isn't your psychology. This is based on pure mathematics and data analysis." He started using new words that sounded alien and ominous in our quiet home: blockchain arbitrage, quantum funds, geopolitical leverage. He'd pronounce them with an air of importance, as if he'd always been an expert in the field. But as I listened, I knew he was just repeating someone else's phrases without grasping their meaning. It was a language designed to intimidate and impress, not to explain. Our intimacy, built over 45 years, the kind of closeness that allowed us to understand each other without words, began to fray. In the evenings, we'd sit in the same room, but he was there in his glowing world and I was here in the deafening silence of our house, filled only by the ticking of the old grandfather clock. I felt more alone than ever. I suggested we drive up to our favorite spot in Sedona, spend a weekend there, stay at that little inn with a view of the Red Rocks. "Now's not the time, Kathy," he answered, not looking up from the screen. "Big things are about to happen. I need to be available. We'll go later, you'll see. We'll buy a house there if you want. Our own place, with panoramic windows." His promises were grand and empty. He wasn't talking to me, but to some imaginary audience, painting a picture of a future where, it seemed, there was no place for me. He was selling the dream to himself, and I was just an unwilling witness. The first concrete, tangible alarm bell rang on Tuesday. I was in the office with my laptop, paying bills online, a routine I performed every month. I opened our joint credit card statement. And there, among the familiar, understandable charges from Fry's, Walgreens, and Shell, I saw a strange, unfamiliar transaction: Veritas Prime Solutions. $250. I'd never heard of the company. Veritas. Truth. What an irony. A quick internet search yielded nothing but a barebones, hastily made splash page with a pretentious lion logo and A.P.O. box address in Georgetown, Cayman Islands. My heart skipped a beat, then started pounding faster. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was wrong. It was like a crack in the foundation of our house. That evening, I approached Richard as he was reading in his favorite armchair. I held the printout in my hand, trying to speak calmly, almost casually. Honey, do you have any idea what this charge is? Veritas Prime. He looked up from his book, and his face went rigid. For a split second, I saw raw panic in his eyes, which he immediately masked with righteous anger. What, are you spying on me now? Checking my spending? His voice was cold and sharp as a shard of glass. I was taken aback by his reaction. Richard, it's our joint card. I just saw a name I didn't recognize and got worried it might be fraud. Well, don't be. He snapped, his voice rising. It's my business. A consulting fee. You don't need to get into it. I know what I'm doing. He stood up and walked out of the room, slamming the office door behind him. I was left standing in the middle of the living room, clutching that useless piece of paper. It felt like I'd been slapped. It wasn't about the $250. It was about the lie, his instant, defensive aggression. He was hiding something. And he was willing to attack me to protect his secret. After that incident, something inside me shifted. The hot anxiety gave way to a cold, detached observation. The psychology professor inside me, whom I had kept on a short leash for so long in my family life, came to the forefront. I was no longer just a worried, hurt wife. I was a field researcher. My own home became my laboratory, and my husband, my primary subject. I didn't hack into his computer or read his messages. That would have been too crude and, besides, useless. He would have just become more careful. My methods were more subtle. I started a new notebook, which I hid in a drawer with my winter sweaters. It wasn't a diary of emotions, but a log of observations. The times of his calls. Their duration. Snatches of phrases overheard by chance. Inconsistencies in his stories. He'd say he had a video conference with partners in Zurich, but after checking the time difference, I knew it was 3 a.m. in Zurich. He'd mentioned getting SEC approval, but he spoke of it as if it were a permit to build a gazebo in the backyard, not a complex bureaucratic procedure. I analyzed his behavior, mentally checking off items from a textbook. He was exhibiting the classic signs of someone who had fallen under the influence of a cult or a sophisticated manipulator. A narrowing of interests, hostility toward any outside criticism, the use of specific jargon, and the idealization of a new mentor. This Aurora had woven a cocoon of flattery and grandiose promises around him, methodically cutting him off from reality and from me. I felt an invisible intellectual duel unfolding between us. On one end was her, the mysterious manipulator. On the other was me, with my knowledge, my experience, and a desperate desire to save the man I loved from himself. The night from Tuesday to Wednesday was muggy and still. I woke up around 2 a.m. with an inexplicable anxiety, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand and realized Richard's side of the bed was empty. That was strange. He always slept like a log, his breathing as steady and deep as the tide. I got up silently, the cool floor chilling the soles of my feet. The house was submerged in a silence broken only by the steady hum of the air conditioner. I tiptoed to the kitchen. The door to his office was slightly ajar, and a thin, nervous sliver of light fell across the dark parquet floor of the hallway. I froze, listening. And I heard his voice, quiet, almost a whisper, but tense to the breaking point, like a taut wire. He was on the phone. Yes, I understand it's the deadline, he whispered. Yes, I have access. It's my old partnership account. She hardly ever uses it. Are you sure this will work? A pause followed. I held my breath, afraid to make a sound, afraid a floorboard would creak. Okay, his voice trembled, and there was a note of pleading in it. I'll do it right now. Transfer to the same wallet? Yes. Yes, I trust you, Aurora. Of course, I trust you. With all my heart. I leaned against the wall, feeling a cold sweat trickle down my spine between my shoulder blades. My old partnership account. She hardly ever uses it. He was talking about me. He was talking about my money. My personal retirement account with Viridian Trust, the one I'd opened before we were married, which was my personal safety net, my last line of defense. Slowly, as if in a dream, like a sleepwalker, I took a step toward the office door. At that moment, he hung up the phone and, taking a deep breath, turned around. He saw me standing in the dark doorway, a pale shadow in a nightgown. His face froze in a mask of pure, unadulterated horror and confusion. We stared at each other from across the room, across the 10 feet of space that had, in that instant, become a chasm. In that deafening silence, the world we had built over 45 years was collapsing. He opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. And I knew, looking into his terrified eyes, that he had already done it. And that things were even worse than I could have possibly imagined. Time froze in that hallway. Seconds stretched into a sticky, viscous eternity. We stood facing each other, me, a pale specter in a nightgown, and him, my husband, his face a mask of horrified recognition. In his eyes, I saw a kaleidoscope of emotions: panic, shame, a desperate attempt to conjure a lie that could possibly patch the gaping abyss that had opened between us. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Any phrase that might have come out, "It's not what you think, I can explain everything," would have been blasphemy, an insult to our shared past. The silence in the house was deafening. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The shock was so profound it cauterized all emotion, leaving behind only a cold, ringing void. My reaction, or rather, the lack of it, terrified him more than any outburst would have. He was expecting hysterics, tears, accusations. He was prepared for that. But he was not prepared for my absolute, inhuman calm. Slowly, as if moving through water, I took a step forward, entered the office, and looked at his laptop screen. The banking app was still open, not mine, but his. And on it, the transaction confirmation. A number that made the room go dark around the edges. I didn't look at him. I looked at the number. Then I turned and, without a word, walked past him, back to our bedroom, lay down on my side of the bed, and stared at the ceiling. He didn't follow me. I heard him close the office door. I lay awake, listening as the night outside gave way to a gray, joyless dawn. My mind, the mind of a social psychology professor, was already working, analyzing, dissecting. I realized my initial reaction had been the right one. Unpredictable. It had pulled the rug out from under him. He didn't know what to expect. And in that uncertainty lay my only, tiny tactical advantage. Morning arrived, as inevitable as a verdict. I got up, showered, dressed. Every movement was mechanical, automatic. When I walked into the kitchen, Richard was already at the table, staring into an empty mug. He hadn't slept all night, it was obvious from his gaunt face and bloodshot eyes. He looked like he had aged 10 years. He jumped up when he saw me. "Kathy," he began, his voice hoarse. "Kathy, I stopped him with a gesture. I walked to the coffee maker and pressed the button. I needed time. I needed a plan. I couldn't afford to improvise. I felt like a bomb disposal expert, and any wrong move could trigger the final detonation that would obliterate the last remnants of our family. I decided to play a role, the most difficult one of my life. The role of a broken, bewildered, but still loving wife. I poured myself a coffee, sat down across from him, and looked him in the eye. There was no anger in my eyes. Only a bottomless, all-consuming sorrow. "Richard," I said quietly, my voice trembling slightly, and that tremor was the only genuine note in my performance. "I'm not going to ask why. I just want to know everything. Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out. As you would your only friend. Because I am still your friend. Aren't I?" It was a calculated blow. I wasn't offering confrontation, but confession. I was appealing not to his conscience, but to his selfishness, to his desire for absolution, to lighten his own burden. He clung to the opportunity like a drowning man to a straw. And he began to talk. He spoke haltingly, incoherently, jumping from one thing to another. He talked about Aurora, about her genius, about her faith in him. He talked about the grand plans, the future she had painted for him. He still spoke of her with a breathlessness, but the old confidence was gone from his voice. The night before, I had punctured his balloon, and now the air was slowly, hissingly escaping. I listened without interrupting, just nodding occasionally. I was a therapist listening to a patient's confession. I was gathering information, every detail, every name, every number. He thought he was receiving forgiveness. In reality, he was handing me a weapon. After our morning conversation, a fragile, unnatural truce settled over the house. Richard tiptoed around, afraid to break the silence. He thought I was grieving, mourning our money. That was partly true. But mostly, I was working. My brain had turned into a supercomputer, processing gigabytes of information. The first chance I got, when Richard insisted on going to the grocery store alone, a desperate, penitent gesture, I rushed to the office. I had an hour at most. I knew he would have deleted the chats, but I also knew that most people don't know how to truly erase their digital footprints. I started with the browser cache. It was like digging through a dumpster, but among the hundreds of banner ads and news sites, I found what I was looking for. Fragments of chat pages, saved in the computer's memory. Images. The very same aurora in front of the Eiffel Tower. I saved the picture and ran a reverse image search. The result came back in 5 seconds. The photo belonged to a popular travel blogger from Sweden. It had been taken 3 years ago and stolen. It was predictable, but now I had my first piece of hard evidence. Then more. I found a mention of the cryptocurrency wallet the money had been sent to. A long, seemingly meaningless string of letters and numbers. I copied it. I found the name of the shell company, Helvetia Global Asset Management. It sounded solid and boring, just as it was meant to. I checked the registration data. The company had been incorporated in Delaware just 3 months prior, via an online service. The director and shareholder were nominees, straw men from Panama. It was a digital ghost, created for one purpose, to steal our money and vanish. I worked quickly, methodically, saving everything to an encrypted flash drive that I hid inside a hollowed-out book, an old volume of Jung's on the psychology of the unconscious. Every detail I uncovered didn't bring relief, only confirmed the scale of the disaster. But with it, a cold, clear resolve began to grow. Having gathered the initial data, I sat in my armchair and tried to build a psychological profile of my enemy. I closed my eyes and pictured not the Swedish blogger, but the person sitting behind the screen. A man or a woman. It likely didn't matter. It was a team. But they had to have a lead scriptwriter, the one who had guided Richard. I analyzed the language they used in the chat fragments I'd managed to recover. The language was very specific. It combined several tactics. First, love bombing, constant compliments, admiration for Richard's mind and insight. You're the only one I can trust with this. Your engineer's mind sees things others don't. It was a direct hit on his vulnerable ego, the ego of a man who felt useless after retirement. Second, the creation of a common enemy, us against them, against the bureaucrats, the banking regulators, the people who don't understand the future. This created a sense of belonging to an elite, secret club. Third, the use of pseudoscientific, complex jargon, which created an illusion of expertise and made it impossible to ask simple questions for fear of looking stupid. And finally, the most important thing, patience. This person or group had been working on Richard for months. They weren't in a hurry. They slowly built trust, like a spider spinning its web. This wasn't some crude Nigerian prince scam. This was a subtle, well-thought-out, long-term psychological operation. My opponent was intelligent, cynical, and ruthless. They were a professional. And that meant they had to have weak spots. All professionals do. Overconfidence, contempt for their victim, and the habit of acting according to a proven template. I realized my only hope was to find that template and use it against them. Before I could start my own game, I had to exhaust all the official channels. This was necessary not because I believed in their effectiveness, but to prove to myself that there was no other way. I called the security department at Viridian Trust. A polite young man with a prepackaged sympathetic tone listened to me and confirmed what I already knew. A wire transfer is virtually impossible to reverse, especially once the funds have been credited to the recipient's account. You can file a fraud report, ma'am, and we'll open an internal investigation, but frankly, the chances of recovering the funds are extremely low. The next step was a call to the local Scottsdale Police Department. The desk sergeant, weary from similar stories, transferred me to the Economic Crimes Unit. The detective I spoke to was empathetic, but his words offered no optimism. "Ma'am, we deal with hundreds of these cases every month. These people operate from overseas, use encrypted communication channels, cryptocurrency. It's almost impossible to track them. We'll take your report, of course, forward it to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3, but you have to understand, it's like finding a needle in a global haystack." I hung up the phone with a sense of bitter satisfaction. The wall I had run into was exactly what I expected. Bureaucracy. Lack of resources. The global nature of the crime. The system was incapable of protecting me. It was incapable of delivering justice. And that meant my hands were untied. If the system couldn't help me, then I didn't have to play by its rules. The moral and legal constraints that once seemed unshakable began to blur. I was alone in a lawless wilderness. And I realized that to catch a wolf, I had to become one myself. The most difficult phase of my plan began, the cognitive restructuring of Richard. I couldn't just walk up to him with a folder of evidence and say, "Look, you've been scammed." His mind, his psyche, would have erected the most powerful defenses. He would have accused me of forgery, of trying to slander him. He would have retreated into a state of complete denial. I needed him to reach that conclusion himself. I just had to nudge him, to guide his thoughts in the right direction. I started from a distance. At dinner one evening, I accidentally stumbled upon a news article on my tablet. "Oh my God, Richard, listen to this awful story," I said with genuine-sounding sympathy. "It's about a professor at UCLA who was scammed out of $500,000. Can you imagine? Some fake investment scheme, too. The poor man never recovered." I read him these stories without drawing any parallels. I was just creating an information backdrop. I was using a technique in psychology called priming. I was saturating his consciousness with the concept of fraud, making it more accessible and recognizable. Then I moved on to questions. Innocent, curious questions. "Honey, I was trying to read about these quantum funds of yours. It's such a complex topic. Could you explain to me exactly how they generate profit? To a layperson like me, it sounds a bit like it violates the laws of physics." I was striking at his weak spot, his pride as an engineer and an expert. He tried to explain, but since his knowledge was superficial, he started to get tangled up. He couldn't answer my simple, logical questions. I saw the first shadow of doubt appear in his eyes. Not doubt in Aurora, but doubt in himself, in his ability to understand what he had gotten into. It was the first crack in his armor. I continued my campaign methodically and relentlessly. I knew Aurora had promised him a quick return. And as week after week went by with no money appearing, I started asking new questions. "Richard, did your partner happen to mention when we might expect the first payment?" "It's just, I'm a little worried about the health insurance bills. They came in higher than usual this quarter." I wasn't accusing. I was sharing my anxiety, making him responsible for my peace of mind. I was transforming him from a victim into a protector. He started writing to Aurora, more insistently. I could see it in the way he paced the room nervously, waiting for a reply. The replies came less frequently and became increasingly vague. "My dearest Richard, we need a little more patience. Unforeseen complications have arisen with the European regulators. We are in the final stage. There were always some external, insurmountable circumstances." I added fuel to the fire. "That's strange," I'd say, looking at my laptop. "I'm reading on a financial forum that Swiss banks have actually simplified all their procedures for international investors recently. Maybe your acquaintance is dealing with some special kind of bank." I contrasted her vague excuses with concrete, verifiable facts that were easy to find online. I was forcing his logical, engineering brain to work against the emotional fairy tale he had bought into. I could see two people at war inside him, the trusting, enchanted dreamer and the pragmatic, skeptical engineer he had been his whole life. And the engineer was slowly starting to win. The turning point came on a Friday evening. He was in his office, and I heard him swear loudly. I walked in. He was staring at the screen. She's asking for more money," he croaked, not looking at me. "Says it's needed to unlock the transaction. 10,000. She says it's the last amount." His voice was filled with despair and, almost hope. Hope that I would make a scene, forbid him, and thus relieve him of the responsibility of making a decision. But I didn't. I walked over, put my hand on his shoulder, and said quietly, "Richard, you're a smart man. You built bridges. You know what a point of no return is. Just ask yourself, is this how real partners behave?" I left him alone. I didn't give him an answer, but the right question. And I knew that tonight, he would find the answer himself. All of Saturday, Richard was silent and grim. He wandered through the house like a ghost, avoiding my gaze. He didn't touch his tablet. In the evening, he came out to the patio where I was sitting. He sat next to me and was quiet for a long time, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood orange. "I was an idiot, Kathy," he finally said, his voice hollow and lifeless. A complete, self-absorbed idiot. It was what I had been waiting for. Not an apology. A confession. Now we could move forward. Now he was on my side, even if he didn't fully realize it yet. I took his hand. "We were idiots," I corrected him gently. And we'll get out of this. Together, too." I wasn't lying in that moment. But he didn't know how I was planning to get us out of it. On Sunday, with his mental armor finally broken, I returned to his office for the final stage of data collection. He wouldn't stop me now. I ran a deep scan of his computer's system. And I found it. The thing they, in their arrogant carelessness, had left behind. It wasn't a chat log or banking data. It was a small, inconspicuous file in a system folder for remote access temporary files. The program Aurora had asked him to install, supposedly for secure communication, left a log file of every session. And in one of those files, in a line of technical data, was an IP address. Not one hidden behind dozens of VPN servers, but the real, original IP address of the computer that initiated the connection the very first time, before all the layers of protection were activated. A rookie mistake. Or the mistake of someone who despised their victim too much to be thoroughly careful. I ran the address through an online service. It didn't belong to Geneva or Zurich. It belonged to an internet service provider in Bucharest, Romania. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was that the IP address was static. It didn't change. It was assigned to a specific subscriber. I had a trail. A thin, almost invisible thread that led across the world, straight to my enemy's door. And it would lead me somewhere I could never have imagined. Discovering that static IP address in Bucharest didn't bring me joy. It didn't even bring satisfaction. It brought clarity. A cold, sharp clarity, like a surgeon's scalpel. The fog had lifted, and in its place was a clear, tangible target. The enemy was no longer a ghost. He had geographic coordinates. I didn't sleep at all that night from Sunday to Monday. I sat in my office, staring at the laptop screen where that string of numbers glowed. I was no longer Catherine Reed, a 68-year-old retiree from Arizona, a retired specialist in social psychology. That woman had died the moment she saw the zero balance in her account. In her place, something else had been born. Something more focused and ruthless. I had become an architect. My project wasn't a bridge or a building. My project was a trap. A perfect, psychologically calibrated trap, designed specifically for one particular person. First, I created a new identity. It wasn't just a pseudonym. It was a complete, multi-layered avatar. I named her Celine de Montfort. The name sounded aristocratic, old world, and a little mysterious. I chose it deliberately. Celine was a reference to the moon, something cold, distant, and influential. Montfort, strong mountain in French, a symbol of immovability and reliability. I found a photo of my great-aunt in old family albums, taken in the 1970s. An elegant woman with intelligent, piercing eyes and a faint, enigmatic smile. Using a simple online editor, I aged the image slightly, added some grain to make it look like a scanned photograph, not a digital picture. Celine de Montfort, according to her legend, was the heiress to an old European fortune, the widow of a Swiss banker who had spent her life in the shadow of her powerful husband but decided to take matters into her own hands after his death. She was intelligent but a little detached from modern technology. She valued privacy above all else. She wasn't just looking for investment opportunities, but for a trusted partner, a consigliere, who could help her navigate the new, aggressive world of digital finance. Every detail of this legend was bait, designed for my enemy's psychological profile. He despised his victims, considering them stupid and greedy. Celine was neither. She was a challenge. She was the big fish that was looking for the fisherman itself. I spent the next few days building Celine's digital infrastructure. I bought a new, cheap laptop with cash at a Walmart. I used the public Wi-Fi at the library so as not to leave a trail on our home network. I registered a new, encrypted email address with a Swiss provider. I created a LinkedIn profile for Celine de Montfort. It was almost empty, just a name, a photo, and a single line in the description: private investor. Discretion is my primary asset. Then came the most delicate stage, casting the bait. I knew my enemy was likely looking for new victims on the same platforms where he had found Richard. Richard, who had now become my silent, obedient assistant, showed me these forums. They were closed Telegram groups and obscure websites dedicated to alternative investments. They were crawling with scammers like Aurora and people as desperate or greedy as Richard. I didn't post there directly. That would have been too crude. Instead, I chose a different tactic. I found several discussion threads where members were complaining about the complexity of international transfers and banking bureaucracy. And there, under Celine's name, I left a single comment. Gentlemen, I follow your discussions with interest. I represent private capital from Europe and am seeking a reliable partner in the United States to execute a project requiring absolute financial flexibility and unconventional solutions. My requirements for confidentiality are extremely high. Serious proposals can be directed to my secure email. I wasn't promising mountains of gold. I was speaking their language. I was creating an aura of exclusivity and mystery. I knew that for a predator accustomed to hunting sheep, the sight of a wounded lion would be an irresistible temptation. He wouldn't be able to resist. His professional ego, his greed, wouldn't allow it. I cast the bait and waited. Richard watched all of this with silent horror. He saw the wife he had known for 45 years transform into someone else. In his eyes, I read a mixture of fear, remorse, and a dawning admiration. 3 days passed. I was beginning to think my plan had failed, that I had overestimated his ego. But on the 4th day, an email arrived in Celine's inbox. It was short and businesslike. The sender was Marcus Thorne. Madame de Montfort, I have seen your message on the forum. My specialty is precisely the kind of unconventional financial operations you speak of. I value confidentiality as much as you do. If your offer still stands, I am prepared to discuss the details. My heart beat faster, but my hands remained cold and steady. The sender's IP address was hidden, but that didn't matter. I knew it was him. The same predator, just in a different skin. The name Aurora was bait for a desperate retiree. The name Marcus Thorne was for a businesswoman with capital. He didn't just change masks, he changed his entire persona to match the psychological profile of his victim. It was his signature. The dry, businesslike style was the complete opposite of the fawning Aurora, and it was this very contrast that confirmed my suspicions. He was a professional. And now he had taken the bait. I waited a full day before replying. I couldn't show too much eagerness. My reply was just as short and formal. Mr. Thorne, thank you for your response. Before we proceed, I would like to ensure we are on the same page. This is a project that requires not only expertise, but absolute trust. I prefer to communicate via a secure messenger. We moved to a chat. And there, our intellectual duel began. He tried to probe me, asking questions about the nature of my capital, about my goals. I answered evasively but intriguingly. I told him a half-truth mixed with lies. I spoke of a family trust, of restrictions imposed by my late husband, of the need to move assets out of the jurisdiction of European tax authorities. I was painting a picture of immense, but shackled wealth, just waiting for its liberator. I was playing the role he himself had written for me. I was his perfect victim. And he was beginning to believe it. Our psychological seduction lasted for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was Kathy Reed, who tended her garden, video chatted with her daughter, and cooked dinners for her broken husband. By night, I became Celine de Montfort, a cold and calculating schemer, spinning a web for my enemy. The scammer calling himself Marcus Thorne gradually let his guard down. I could feel it. His tone became more confidential, almost intimate. He started using the same techniques he had with Richard: flattery, creating a common enemy, those greedy bankers, making promises. Celine, together we can not only protect your money, we can multiply it in ways your late husband never dreamed of, he wrote. We will build our own little financial empire. I played along, admiring his intellect and insight. I let him believe he was in complete control of the situation. I told him about my plan. I claimed to have insider information about an upcoming merger of 2 pharmaceutical companies. If a large sum were invested in one of them before the official announcement, the profits would be astronomical. The legend was worked out to the smallest detail. I used the names of real companies, but altered the specifics so they couldn't be verified. I even created a few fake news items on obscure financial blogs to support my story. He took the bait. His greed overrode his caution. He saw not just a profit, but the jackpot of a lifetime. He himself began to push me to act. Celine, we can't miss this chance. We have to move quickly, he wrote. I hesitated, feigning doubt and fear. Marcus, I'm scared. It's such a large sum. What if something goes wrong? My feigned vulnerability made him feel stronger and more confident. He saw himself as a knight rescuing a rich but naive lady. He was so blinded by his role that he couldn't see the trap that was about to snap shut. The climax came on a Thursday. I told him I was ready to act. But there was one problem. Marcus, I wrote, for my stock purchase transaction to go unnoticed, it has to be mirrored. My bank requires a matching sum to be deposited by my American partner as collateral. It's a foolish rule, but there's no way around it. As soon as their system sees your transaction, it will automatically unlock mine. I described to him the exact same scheme he had used on Richard. I didn't even bother to change it. That was the whole point of my revenge, to catch him with his own primitive trick. I expected him to be suspicious. But his brain, drunk on the proximity of a huge score, was no longer capable of critical analysis. He could only see the final goal. He agreed. Of course, Celine. That's a standard procedure for operations like this. How much is needed? I named the amount, $482,000. Down to the last cent. The same amount he had stolen from us. I explained it as a requirement of my trust. He didn't hesitate for a second. I gave him the account details. It wasn't an ordinary bank account. It was a complex cryptocurrency escrow contract that I had created with the help of an anonymous freelance programmer from the other side of the world, whom I'd paid in Bitcoin. The contract was designed so that funds deposited into it could only be withdrawn with 2 keys. I had one. The second simply didn't exist. Money that went in could never come out. It was a digital black hole. I sat in front of the laptop, my heart pounding so loudly I thought the whole house could hear it. Richard stood behind me, holding his breath. A message from Marcus appeared in the chat window. The money has been sent. Check it. Our future begins now, Celine. I opened the escrow account page, and I saw the numbers. They were there. Every last cent. In that moment, I felt no triumph. I felt no joy. Only a cold, all-consuming emptiness. I highlighted our entire chat with Marcus, our entire 2-week correspondence, and sent it to him in a single message. And below it, I added a single photograph, a happy picture of Richard and me, taken in this very house a year ago. And then I closed the laptop. A week passed. We never knew what he did after seeing my last message. Did he scream? Cry? Smash his computer? It didn't matter anymore. He had vanished from our lives forever. I wasn't able to recover all the money. Some of it went to pay the programmer, some was lost to fees and currency fluctuations. But I got back about $400,000. It was enough. Life slowly settled into a new routine. But it was a different life. Richard had changed. His self-assurance, his engineering hubris, had vanished without a trace. He became quiet, thoughtful. He looked at me with a new expression, a mixture of fear, guilt, and awe. He no longer treated my knowledge as an amusing hobby. Our bond hadn't broken. On the contrary, it had become stronger, but it was now based not on 45 years of habit, but on a harsh, hard-won truth. One evening, while sorting through old papers, I decided to do one last piece of research out of curiosity. I typed the name of that shell company, Helvetia Global Asset Management, into a search engine. The first few links were useless. But then I stumbled upon a small article in the archives of a European financial investigation journal. The article had been published just a month earlier. It was about the uncovering of a major international money laundering ring. And in the list of front companies used in these operations, I saw the familiar name. I read on, and the hair on my arms stood on end. The scheme was simple and diabolical. The criminals found trusting retirees in the U.S., had them register companies in their names, supposedly for a partnership, and then used their accounts and identities to launder dirty money. Richard wasn't just a victim of theft. He was being set up to be the fall guy. His name and our address were already on the registration documents. If Aurora hadn't stolen our money but had continued her game, then in a few months it wouldn't have been the mailman at our door, but FBI agents. We would have faced not just financial loss, but a federal indictment, confiscation of all our assets, and possibly prison. That same evening, I sat with Richard on our patio. The air was warm and smelled of jasmine. I told him everything I had discovered. He listened in silence, his face in the light of the setting sun looking as if it were carved from stone. When I finished, he didn't say a word for a long time. He just took my hand and squeezed it tightly. In that simple gesture was everything, the realization of the abyss we had stood at the edge of, a belated understanding, and immeasurable gratitude. My wisdom, my life experience, my boring theories that our family had ignored for so long hadn't just gotten our money back. They had saved us. My knowledge of human nature, which I had thought useless in the new digital world, had turned out to be our only shield. The disaster, the betrayal that I thought had destroyed our lives, had actually been our salvation. It had forced me to act, forced me to use everything I knew, and in doing so, had prevented a much more terrible, irreparable end. We sat in silence, holding hands, and watched the last rays of the sun fade behind the mountains. A new life lay ahead of us. Not as carefree as before. Quieter, wiser. A life built not on illusions, but on the bitter yet valuable knowledge of how fragile the world is and how important it is to be able to listen to those who speak the language of silence. Our family hadn't fallen apart. On the contrary, it had found a new, stronger foundation. A foundation built on ruins, but one that could withstand any storm. And in the cool of the evening, for the first time in a long time, I felt not emptiness, but peace. A heavy, hard one, but real peace. A harvest of silence.